So remember I said, there's sort of three steps, 3 points in the groundwork, at least the first part of it. And so, here we're on the first step where Kant wants to pick out what he thinks is unconditionally good. Good in all possible cases. And Kant thinks we need some kind of touchstone, some kind of standard for what is good in a way that'll let us pick other things out that we can use this thing to measure, right? You know, think about natural law theory. It had all these problems. You know, pick out pieces of human nature, but well, you need some sort of standard of goodness because it seems some parts of human nature are maybe admirable, some parts are not so admirable, right? And with this in mind, Kant says we need some standard of the unconditionally good before we can do anything else. So Kant starts by considering some possible candidates for this unconditionally good. You'll sometimes see this translated as good without qualification. I think that's the translation your reading uses. Unconditionally good also works. The German could mean either, right, if you look at it. And so, Kant, when he talks about unconditionally good, like I said, he means that it is good in all possible circumstances, all possible cases. Can't even imagine a case where it is bad. And now this part of the groundwork, I think, goes by a little too quickly. Kant spends like a page and a half on it, maybe. I think there's more to be said here, and we should say more. So let's go through it a little more slowly and see what Kant's doing. So Kant starts by very quickly considering some failed candidates for the unconditionally good, some things people might throw out there that Kant thinks aren't really going to fit the bill, not really going to work. He says gifts of fortune, things like wealth, talents, those are things like, intelligence, charisma, personality traits like courage and self-control. And then finally, happiness. And so 1 through 3, Kant can dismiss and does dismiss for pretty similar reasons. It's the same argument he thinks applies to all of them. And that is that gifts of fortune, wealth, things like that, talents, things like intelligence or charisma, and personality traits like courage or self-control can all be put to bad uses. If someone is a con man, then the fact that he is intelligent and charismatic is a bad thing because it makes him more able to effectively con innocent people out of their money, right? If someone is rich and he wants to commit a horrible crime, he wants to murder somebody, makes it easier for him to probably murder somebody, he can hire somebody, easier for him to get away with it. If he is caught, he can hire the best lawyers, right? If somebody has a bad will, if somebody is a bad person, these things can be misused. They actually make him more dangerous and worse. You would not want somebody who wants to kill somebody he doesn't like to be rich. Makes it more likely he can do it and get away with it, right? You would not want a con man to actually be intelligent or charismatic. You, even as an objective, disinterested observer, when you hear about this, you don't want that because that makes him more able to get away with it and con innocent people out of their money, right? Bernie Madoff, the guy who conned everybody, ran the pyramid scheme, stole loads of money. If Bernie Madoff had been stupid, he wouldn't have got away with it for so long, right? Kant will say the same holds for courage, right? Think about it this way, right? In an ideal world, we wouldn't have Nazis, right? But if we have to have Nazis in the world, would you rather have Nazis that are brave enough to march through the streets of Charlottesville with tiki torches, or Nazis who stay in mom's basement and never leave? If you gotta have Nazis, it's better to have the cowardly Nazis who just sit there in mom's basement and do whatever Nazis do in mom's basement, right? It is much worse if your Nazis are brave enough to march through the streets of a city, right? And hurt people and do all the awful stuff that Nazis do. So, courage is bad if someone has a bad will, you know. It makes them more able to do the bad things they want to do. Now, Kant would say, look, in all of these cases, if the person had a good will, these things would be good, right? A rich person who wants to use his money to help others, well, that's great, but that's because he has a good will. An incredibly intelligent person who wants to use that to cure cancer, well, that's great, but it's only good because he has a good will. You know, someone, soldiers fighting in a just war, soldiers who are actually fighting against Nazis back in World War II, that is a good thing. That kind of courage is good, but it's because they have a good will, right? In all of these cases, not only is the thing in question not unconditionally good, having a good will is actually the condition for it being good. So you see, Kant's argument here has two parts. One, these things can't be unconditionally good. Two, the good will is actually the condition for them being good. All right. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on happiness, for two reasons. One, I think Kant's argument is a little more subtle here. And B, you already notice that Kant is really, really differing from the utilitarian. The utilitarian thinks happiness is good no matter who or what has it. Kant is taking a very different approach here. He does not think that's right. And this is actually really important. It's not just an interesting point of difference. It will be important when we get to punishment, when we get to what is the point of criminal punishment, because this stance Kant takes on happiness here, I think, is behind some of that. Okay, so why does Kant think happiness is not unconditionally good? Now, one reason, and Kant puts some weight on this, and I don't really find it the most convincing one, is he thinks if you don't have a good will, happiness can somehow corrupt you. I mean, he might be right about this. I don't know. He doesn't really explain it. I don't find this his most compelling or interesting reason. I think the other considerations he kind of mentions in passing are actually much more compelling and interesting reasons to think that happiness is not always unconditionally good. And there are two things here. One is just that happiness, and Kant defines happiness as the utilitarian does, pleasure in the absence of pain, can actually have bad sources, right? People get pleasure from all sorts of bad things, right? Take a trivial example of it. The high school bully who picks on the weak kid and sticks his head in the toilet. He enjoys that. Most of us would say that the pleasure the bully gets out of hurting another person is not good, right? Now, what the utilitarian will say is like, well, okay, bully's happiness is happiness, all happiness is good, but when you do the balance, the pain he causes his victim is probably greater. So really, bullies shouldn't go around harassing and hurting weaker kids because the suffering they cause others is greater than the happiness they get out of it. That might be right. It just seems to do a little bit too much dancing around. Seems like the Kantian answer here. What Kant would say is, no. Happiness with bad sources, like the bully's happiness, is just not good. That seems more intuitive to me than all this talk about utility calculations, right? And you can even think about hair-raising terrible cases, right? Some monster watching child pornography. Well, we wouldn't think that happiness is good. The utilitarian seems to be forced to say that it is. Well, the And again, they'll give the same answer. Well, the pleasure he gets out of it is outweighed by the horrible pain it does his victim, so bad bet from a utilitarian standpoint. Kant would just say, no, no, no. This happiness has a bad source. It is not good. People who have good wills will not get happiness from these bad sources. And this is another way that having a good will is a condition on this other thing being good. There's another idea here, and this is really going to be important when we get to what Kant and the utilitarians think about punishment. And that is that even if the happiness someone is experiencing has an innocent source, it might not be good. In fact, it won't be good if they don't deserve it. Let me give you guys an example of this. I'll fall back on Nazis again because, well, very, very few people are going to object to using Nazis as an example. Very few people are going to defend Nazis. God help, it's not zero. I have been unfortunate enough to meet a Nazi or two. Yeah. Anyway, but very, very, very rare, right? So anyway, think about this. Let's take an actual member of the party, Nazi, not somebody like Richard Spencer play acting a Nazi, right? I mean, he's bad enough, but an actual Nazi. Joseph Mengele was this Nazi doctor. He performed horrible experiments. I won't go into them. I don't even want to think about them. Then got away at the end of the war. Ran to Argentina, lived out his life as a farmer, and just died peacefully. Now, most of us, when we think about Mengele, if we think about Mengele relaxing on his farm, living the life of a quiet farmer, there's nothing wrong in and of itself with enjoying the life of a farmer, right? Sitting on your porch, whatever, end of the day, happy, nothing is wrong with that in and of itself. But we, or I should say I, but I think a lot of you will agree with me, a lot of us think that if someone like Mengele, who clearly does not deserve to be happy, it is not good that he is happy even if the source of his happiness is innocent pleasures, right? It would be much better, I think, and I'm going to guess a lot of you do too, if the Allies had captured Mengele and snapped his neck at the end of the war, right? Mengele does not deserve to be happy. In a better world, Mengele would not have gotten a chance to go off to Argentina and be happy. He'd have gotten his neck snapped like a lot of the other Nazis, right? If you have that thought that Mengele does not deserve to be happy, I don't know, maybe you oppose the death penalty, which in actual practice has some problems. If you oppose the death penalty, maybe you think Mengele should be in jail. But I think most of you are going to think it's bad if Mengele gets to relax on his large farm at the end of the day after the terrible things he's done, right? His happiness is not good because he does not deserve it. Kant will say the same thing for other people with a bad will, right? If you are a good person, you deserve to be happy. But once again, having a good will is a condition on happiness being good. And we can argue maybe it's just not having, how much of a good will, how much you have to do to deserve happiness, but it's very clear, or it seems to me very clear, some people do not deserve happiness. And if you agree with that, then you are on the same page as Kant here, and you say, well, that's why happiness cannot be unconditionally good, despite what the utilitarians say. For a utilitarian, anybody's happiness is good, just might be bad because it's outweighed by pain elsewhere. Kant will say some people's happiness, some forms of happiness, are not good. They don't even get considered.